Hi, my name's Joanne Erspamer, and my family and I are going to be sharing with you the first in a series of 4 Advent videos. Advent is the season of hope, peace, joy, and love. And as we start to explore the customs and traditions of the season of Christmas and Advent around the world, we are going to start our journey with Italy. My mom was born and raised in Rome, Italy. And so I'm going to share with you some of the traditions that I've learned growing up with her and my family. While Christmas here is often started around Thanksgiving and all the decorations go up, in Italy, this begins on December 8th with a religious holiday known as La Festa dell'Immacolata. This is also what signifies the opening of the Christmas markets, the decorating, and the Christmas season, or Natale. A traditional scene in Italy is the Nativity Crib. This is also called the Presepe. Using a crib to tell the story of Christmas was made popular by St. Francis of Assisi in 1223. In cities, you can find large outdoor scenes of the Nativity Crib, and also you can find smaller scale models within family homes. Oftentimes, the Nativity Crib would include a village scene as well. Here's an example of a smaller scale version of what my mom would always put up and still does in our home at Christmas time. So here you can see the Nativity Crib. You see Mary and Joseph in the crib. You see an angel. You can see 3 wise men off in the distance. And oftentimes in our home, we would sometimes move them around and get them closer as the days approached. Here you can see some other figures and a bridge. So this is a very small version of what I had growing up and continue to see in my mom's home. Though this nativity is put out on December 8th, the crib is empty until December 24th. And at that time, baby Jesus is placed in it. And so my mom also followed this tradition. And so we would place baby Jesus in his crib on December 24th. And oftentimes you see a candle here, and oftentimes there would be other decorations or candles that would be placed throughout the village. Naples is actually home to the largest nativity crib scene, and in the Neapolitan villages, you might find everyday people and objects, and even famous people or politicians, and you can still see this today. The 8 days before Christmas is also called the Novena, and this includes a series of prayers and church services that families will attend. For these days, you will also hear carolers in the streets, and as my mom recalls, in Rome and throughout southern Italy, you might hear the bagpipe players playing their songs. They're called Zampognari, and they would travel from the mountains and they would come into the streets and play their bagpipes and traditional Christmas songs. A great way and here's a little figurine that I'm holding up. A great way to hear some of these wonderful musicians is if you do a search on YouTube for Zampognari, or I'm sure if you searched Italian bagpipes, or Christmas bagpipes, you might hear some videos. Food also plays a role in the traditions, and so a favorite of mine is roasted chestnuts. You can find chestnuts roasting openly by vendors in the streets and in the markets. On Christmas Eve, it's also known as the Feast of 7 Fish, or other meatless meals might be eaten by families, and then they also attend a midnight service, and then after that they might come home and enjoy a dessert of panettone. And panettone is a very traditional dessert. It's an Italian sweetbread, and it's one of my mom's favorites. She also shared memories of eating lasagna and roasted chicken, and then following that up with the panettone. And this is an Italian sweetbread. It's a Christmas tradition bread, and it will often have candied fruit in it. You can also find it with versions of chocolate in it as well. And this can also be found in many recipes on the internet, or oftentimes you can find it locally in stores. For Christmas, Babbo Natale, or Santa Claus, visits children and brings some gifts. And another day of gift giving happens on the Epiphany. Celebrations for the Christmas season in Italy last through January 6th, which is the Epiphany. And on that day, a Christian legend is a fun story that is told and celebrated, and it's that of La Befana. And she is known to bring gifts to children and fill stockings hung by fireplaces. And this is a tradition that my mom maintained with us, and so we wouldn't get our stockings until the January the 6th. And it's a really celebrated tradition in Italy. And I have a figurine of what La Befana would look like with her broom, La Scopa. And this would be found in markets and throughout decorations. Evan is going to share the story of La Befana.
The story goes that one day the three wise men came to her house, and they asked her to lead them to the cradle where baby Jesus lay. And she said that she was too busy cleaning her house. She was always found with a broom in her hand. So the wise men left. Not too long after, she decided she had made a terrible mistake, and gathered gifts to go and search for the baby boy, following the same star that the wise men had. And when she couldn't find him, she continued to wander, searching every house for baby Jesus, leaving gifts along the way.
The story of La Befana that Evan told is one version, and here is a lovely book that tells another version of the story. Very similar, however. Now Ellie is going to share with you a fun activity that you might be able to do. It is making pasta ornaments or pasta garland. You can use different shapes of pasta and glue them together and paint them. And examples of this can be found online as well.
So I'm just going to show you a couple of the examples that I made earlier. One is a snowflake shape, and another is a diamond or rhombus, and I also made a garland. So basically what you're going to do, I'm just going to explain this one real quick, is you take pasta of your choosing. For this we used mini wheel noodles, and you glue them together. First I put one in the middle, 6 around it, and then where they intersected I put one in between those. And then I dry brushed some gold paint on top, which is basically just taking a little bit of paint on a dry paintbrush that hasn't been wet yet, and just brushing it over slightly so it's not completely wet. And then you can just take a piece of string and tie it around, and then you can hang it on your tree. That's the same for this one, except it's just a different pattern. You can glue 3 together and then 2 triangles, 1 on each side. For the garland, I just cut out a piece of string, and then using the back side of the noodles, I glued them to the string. I did not measure in between, but they're about a few inches apart, I think. You can measure if you want to make it more even, and you can put this on like a Christmas tree or above a door frame or something.
These are some fun examples of an easy craft project or activity that you can do. It doesn't use much pasta. You can just have one special ornament that you make, and then you can eat the rest of the box of pasta. A couple other things you might enjoy doing is perhaps you would like to roast some chestnuts. I have an example here. This is what a chestnut looks like. And then here is one after it's been roasted. There's some great recipes online that you can follow for proper roasting, and these can be found right now in some grocery stores. And you might also want to try Panettone, and that's a the classic Italian bread we were talking about, and it comes in a cylindrical mold, and it's sold in stores right now also locally, but you can also make it, and that might be fun, and there are some recipes for that online as well, so kind of look through and pick the one that looks good to you. So I used a couple resources for putting this all together. So other than my mom's stories, I also looked up some information, and I really appreciated the information from Essential Italy and Walks of Italy. Both are on Pinterest. And then Sue VanOss created an Advent Around the World brochure in 2018. And so that was another resource for me. I hope you've enjoyed what we've been able to share with you today, and thank you for listening to the traditions and customs of my family and our Italian Christmas. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mother Debra, and welcome to Mother Debra's Story Time. I'm so glad you joined me. Throughout Advent, I'm going to be sharing 4 of my favorite Christmas stories to help you get ready for Christmas. Here we go. Here's the first one. It's called The Tale of Three Trees, and it's actually a traditional folk tale. No one knows who really first told it, but this one is rewritten by Angela Elwell Hunt, and it's illustrated by Tim Jolke. Once upon a time, on a mountaintop, 3 little trees stood and dreamed of what they wanted to be when they grew up. The first little tree looked up at the stars twinkling like diamonds above him. "I want to hold treasure," he said. "I want to be filled and covered with gold and filled with precious stones. I will be the most beautiful treasure chest in the world." The second little tree looked up and out at the small stream trickling on by on its way to the ocean. "I want to be a strong sailing ship. I want to travel mighty waters and carry powerful kings. I will be the strongest ship in the world." The third little tree, she looked down into the valley below where busy men and busy women worked in a busy town. "I don't want to leave the mountaintop at all," she said. "I want to grow tall, that when people stop and look at me, they will raise their eyes to the heavens and think of God. I will be the tallest tree ever." Years passed. The rains came, the sun shone, and the little trees grew tall. But then one day, 3 woodcutters climbed the mountain. Uh-oh. The first woodcutter looked at the first tree and said, "This tree is beautiful. It's the perfect tree for me. and with a swoop of his axe, the tree fell down. The second woodcutter looked at the second tree and said, "This tree is strong. It's the perfect tree for me." And with a swoop of his axe, it fell down. The third tree felt her heart sink when the last woodcutter looked at her. She stood straight and tall and pointed bravely to the heaven. But the woodcutter never looked up. "Any kind of tree will do for me," he muttered, and with a swoop of his axe, she fell down too. The first tree. He rejoiced when the woodcutter brought him to a carpenter's shop. But the busy carpenter was not thinking about treasure chests that day. No, instead, his working, worn hands fashioned the tree into a feed box for farm animals. The once beautiful tree was not covered with gold or filled with treasure. He was coated with sawdust and filled with hay for hungry farm animals. The second tree smiled when the woodcutter took him to a shipyard. But no mighty sailing ships were being made that day. Instead, the once strong tree was hammered and sawed into a simple fishing boat. Too small and too weak to sail an ocean or even a river, he was taken to a little lake. Every day he brought in loads of dead, smelly fish. Ew. The third tree was confused when the woodcutter cut her into strong beams and left her in a lumber yard. What happened, the once tall tree wondered. All I ever wanted to do was stay on the mountaintop and point to God. Many, many days and nights passed. The three trees nearly forgot their dreams. But one night, golden starlight poured over the first tree as a young woman placed her newborn baby in the feed box. "I wish I could have made a cradle for him," her husband whispered. The mother squeezed his hand and smiled as the starlight shone on the smooth and sturdy wood box. "This manger is beautiful." And suddenly, the first tree knew he was holding the greatest treasure in the world. One evening, a tired traveler and his friends crowded into the old fishing boat. The traveler fell asleep as the second tree quietly sailed out into the ocean. Soon a thundering and thrashing storm arose. The little tree shuddered. He knew he did not have enough strength to carry so many passengers safely through the wind and rain. The tired man awakened. He stood up, stretched out his hand, and said, "Peace." The storm stopped as quickly as it had begun, and suddenly the second tree knew he was carrying the King of heaven and earth. One Friday morning, the third tree was startled when her beams were yanked from the forgotten woodpile. She flinched as she was carried through an angry, jeering crowd. She shuddered when soldiers nailed a man's hands to her. She felt ugly and harsh and cruel. But on Sunday morning, when the sun rose and the earth trembled with joy beneath her, the third tree knew that God's love had changed everything. It had made the first tree beautiful. It had made the second tree strong. And every time people thought of the third tree, they would think of God. I hope you enjoyed the tale of the three trees and that you'll come back next week and hear another story. Have a great week. Bye-bye.